things I've been calling for is that the federal government needs to collect the data about the disparities as it has affected these communities in terms of the coronavirus, COVID-19, and what we need in terms of resources in those communities. The federal government should be tracking this so we can deploy the resources where they're needed.
We've all seen the headlines. Black Californians account for 11% of states' COVID-19 deaths, but make up only 6% of the population. 42% of those killed by COVID-19 in U.S. are black, analysis of available data shows. It is a fact that blacks are more likely to contract the coronavirus. It is also a fact that the reasons for this have nothing to do with racism, let alone institutional racism or structural racism or systemic racism. First of all, let's talk about the fact that blacks are more likely to have pre-existing conditions.
We know that they have those pre-existing conditions, the diabetes, the heart disease, the asthma, that makes them more likely to suffer consequences because of coronavirus. And part of the reason they have that is there is a genetic component behind that, because we know that some of these things like high blood pressure in African Americans tends to be worse. But also at the same time, we know that there's some socioeconomic conditions that are causing them to be in situations where they're not only more likely to get coronavirus, but also more likely to suffer the consequences behind it. Healthcare access is limited in some situations, in a lot of situations across the country. And to be honestly frank, there are some situations where they're distrustful of the medical community because of history that's happened in the past, and so they're more reluctant to seek medical care until they absolutely need it, and that means they're not getting that early care that can have a huge impact.
And about these underlying preconditions, Heather McDonald of the Manhattan Institute said, the diabetes rate among black adults was 66% higher than among white adults in 2017. The hypertension rate 49% higher, obesity rate 25% higher. In 2018, blacks accounted for 42% of new HIV diagnoses, though blacks are about 12% of the nation's population, end of quote. Second, beyond preconditions, blacks are more likely to be exposed to the coronavirus. Why? More likely to live in a densely populated area, more likely to have a job where they can't stay at home, more likely to have a job that requires them to be in health care, in public transportation, to interact with the public, in food services. These are some of the reasons why blacks are more likely to be exposed to the coronavirus.
While the African American community is more prone to conditions like hypertension and diabetes, we need to look at the larger social structure that impacts those poor health outcomes. Parker says where you live matters. Policies dating back to the 1930s have left many black neighborhoods lacking critical needs like access to healthy food. Take Flint, for example. There are no grocery stores within the city limit. Also, many African Americans work so-called essential jobs and use public transportation. They live in multi-generational and extended family homes, all increasing exposure to the coronavirus.
By the way, not that the media cares nearly as much, but Jews are also disproportionately likely to be exposed to the coronavirus. This piece in Forward explains why. 23% of Americans say they have no one in their networks with whom they can be intimate, whereas less than 1% of Jewish Americans make such claims. 21% of Americans claim they have 4 or more people in their intimate social networks. 64% of Jews have 4 or more in their networks. And it's not just Orthodox Jews. We associate the Orthodox with tight-knit communities. Orthodox Jews report a network size of 3.8 intimates, the lowest of all denominations. Conservative, Reform, and those Jews who are just Jewish actually report a network size of 4. End of quote. No, the media does not care nearly as much about the fact that Jews living in New York are more likely to contract the coronavirus, or about the fact that Native Americans living on reservations are more likely to contract the coronavirus. No, let's just talk about black people. Why? Because you can make an argument that blacks, here again, are victimized by an institutionalized racist system. Much more difficult to do that regarding other disparities within the black community that they don't seem to care nearly as much about. How about one, crime?
Guess what? I could be at work, at school, in my car. I can still get shot by the police. I can get shot anywhere.
This woman obviously so upset, and she, her fear is genuine. She says that she believes that wherever she is, she could get shot. So it's no more dangerous for her to be in the middle of that crowd. How do you respond to that?
Well, her fear isn't real. It's based on emotion, and it's not based on anything factual that she'd be able to articulate. It's just out of control behavior. I'll tell you what she faces danger, where she faces danger. It's being on the street in any American ghetto where the black-on-black crime is a bigger threat and a bigger problem in the black community than the police use of force.
Now, where is that congressional subcommittee hearing on the fact that blacks are more likely to be victimized by crime and are more likely to commit crime? I want the subcommittee hearing on that numerical disparity. Now, what about fatherless homes? 70% of black kids are brought into this world without a father in the home.
A new report about the rate of black homicide victims in the nation ranks Tennessee at number 8. And the majority of the victims are young men. The study shows those committing crimes often live without their biological fathers.
Now, where's the hearing on that statistical disparity? And what about unequal education outcomes? Outcomes in quality of education, outcomes in graduation rates. Why aren't we as concerned about that?
Tonight, an alarming discovery coming out of city schools. Our Project Baltimore team has found that 1/3 of high schools in Baltimore last year didn't have any students proficient in math.
It seems to me these issues are far more pressing than racism. And speaking of racism, have you noticed how much of it is just flat out revenge, anger over stuff that never happened to you? This is why we're talking about reparations. Reparations, in my opinion, is the extraction of money from people who were never slave owners to be given to people who were never slaves. It is all about revenge. Did you see that documentary on the O.J. Simpson case? And one of the O.J. jurors was interviewed and explained why it was she voted to find him not guilty?
Do you think that they're members of the jury that voted to acquit O.J. because of Rodney King?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
How many of you think felt that way?
Oh, probably 90% of us.
90%? Did you feel that way?
Yes.
That was payback.
Uh-huh.
You think that's right?
Revenge for Rodney King? Are you serious? O.J. Simpson killed 2 people, and you're mad because of Rodney King, and therefore you cut him loose? This is demented. Revenge for slavery, revenge for Jim Crow, revenge for police brutality, revenge for things that may or may not have happened to you, revenge for things that you've heard about, read about. Honestly, all a country can be is just in its own time. And while you are trying to right the wrongs of the past, you're blowing opportunities for today. One of my favorite movies is a movie called No Country for Old Men. In this scene, sheriff goes to visit another sheriff. The older sheriff is in a wheelchair, paralyzed because he was shot by somebody who is in prison. And the other sheriff asked the sheriff in the wheelchair, "What would you have done had they released this man who shot you?"
That man that shot you died in prison?
Angola, yeah.
What'd you done? He'd have been released?
Oh, I don't know. Nothing. Wouldn't be no point in it.
Kind of surprised to hear you say that.
Well, all the time you spend trying to get back what's been took from you, more is going out the door. After a while, you just have to try to get a tourniquet on it.
The war for civil rights has been won. The good guys won. For the most part, people in this country have their civil rights. Back in 1997, there was a Times CNN poll. Black teens and white teens were asked about racism, and both said, not too surprisingly, that racism was a major problem in America. But then the black teens were asked, is racism a big problem, a minor problem, or no problem in your own daily life? 89% said it wasn't a problem in my own daily life. In fact, more black teens than white teens said failure to take advantage of available opportunities was a bigger problem than racism. So can we do this? Can we recognize that the war for civil rights has been won? The good guys won. Let's convert the troops to civilian duty and make sure that we provide opportunities so that every American can live up to his or her God-given potential.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth, number one. Number two, we are not a charity. We cannot give them the game. That's number two. And number three is we execute from the very start of the game to the very end of the game. That did not happen. I'm from the old school. I believe this. I would rather play with 10 people and just get penalized all the way until we got to do something else, rather than play with 11 when I know that right now that person is not sold out to be a part of this team. It is more about them than it is about the team. I cannot play with them, cannot win with them, cannot coach with them, can't do it. I want winners.
I'm Larry Elder, and we've got a country to save. I'll see you next time.